Well, good day, everybody. Welcome back to the channel. Well, guess who we have today? Guest appearance by Mr. Kevin Kittle. Hi, Kevin. How you doing?
Hi, Joe. Thanks.
Welcome back to the studio. And you've brought something today that's quite extraordinary, I think. This is an SCM, Smith Corona Poweriter custom typewriter, right?
Exactly.
So this is like the 6 Series, 1960s roughly, era type bar, but it's an electrified type bar.
Right.
But it's not just electrified.
Right. It's very unique when it comes to that. And it is. This is a 6 Series. This particular one by the Typewriter database shows up as 1964. Oh. And they made this typewriter from about 63-ish, 63 through maybe about 67. They only made it for a few years as far as this entire model. And they... around 65 or 66, they actually changed some of the electronics. And I say electronics because what's so unique about this typewriter is that not only is it a 6 Series type bar electric machine in a portable size, it is also battery operated.
Battery operated electric type bar machine. So you could take this out.
You could take this out.
Camping or whatever, right?
Exactly. You could take this out camping and all that stuff, and then you don't have to plug it in. You just turn it on, and you can start typing. So it's portable just like a manual. Wow. You don't want to be, you're off the grid.
Off the grid.
You know, and you can type with it, and yet you get the functionality and the good impression and the easy touch of an electric typewriter. And the speed of an electric typewriter.
Wow. So I would say in the whole realm of type bar typewriters, a battery-powered type bar typewriter is pretty unusual. It is unusual.
I'd seen these a few years ago looking at them, and I know you had your Cornet Automatic 12.
Which we call jitters.
Jitters, right. And, of course, those aren't battery-operated. And so this one I ran across, it's, a battery-operated one. And how does that work? And does it work very well or not?
And did it work when you first got it?
In this one, no.
Okay.
It kind of, sort of wanted to work, but it really didn't.
This is a saga of, months that you've been working on this.
It's been a few months.
It's been a few months. And every week or so, I'd get an update from Kevin about what he's doing. And it was a lot of work around the power supply and the motor system and all that of this, which we'll get into.
Right.
Yeah. And it's been an extraordinary journey, I think, is it works, right?
It works. And it seems to work really well now.
Yeah.
But on the mechanical side of it, as far as the typewriter, it's pretty much a standard Smith Corona electric typewriter, type bar. The keyboard, you see, it's that classic they were doing in the 60s and stuff like that. It has all the normal functions, and then the...
Yes, the articulating
the lid, and it's a ribbon, all that. And since it was an early 60s Smith Corona, it is... manually operated carriage.
Operated carriage, right.
So basically the electric part of it is only running your type bars and such as your space bar 2 and things like that.
Very cool.
But it is a full featured. I mean, this is like the 5 Series Smith Corona as far as size and all that.
So it's a little smaller than the Galaxy 12 in terms of width, but it is, of course, taller because it has the motor and all that. They have more room in it for that.
They have more room in it. And they actually lifted the typewriter a little bit on the bottom to accommodate the motor and stuff like that.
Oh, yes.
So that it all sits below the mechanical part of it. And in functionality, they were in that era where they were using the
change of type
keys. So this one has exclamation point number 1 and plus and equals on that side. And then it has ribbon reverse and stuff like that, but it has kind of a unique here, and maybe some of the, this is showing that when you're plugged in, it has a neon bulb.
For AC.
So when it's battery operated, it doesn't do that, and your on and off switch and your ribbon control. What you'll notice that it doesn't have, which a lot of the Smith Corona 5 Series had, and I'm sure your Corona also had, was a adjustable impression.
Oh, yeah.
And the reason they don't have that in this particular case is that it doesn't have an idler pulley.
So there's only one belt.
There's only one belt.
Instead of 2 belts.
Right. So, and the reason they did that was because it does not have an AC electric motor. It has a DC-powered
electric motor.
Because you're running off a battery sometimes. And then you can get an idea of that right away because we turn it on.
Very quiet.
That's the motor running.
Wow. And there's no cord plugged in. There is no cord on this machine right now, and it's electrified. It's a miracle, Kevin.
It's a miracle.
The actual cord is right here. We haven't plugged it in yet.
Right. We haven't plugged it in.
How cool is that? So we don't have a piece of paper yet, but wow. Electrified, battery-powered type bar machine.
Right, exactly.
Fantastic. Well, I'm sure you guys are a little curious about how this thing works. I certainly am. So let's take the bottom panel off and have Kevin explain the inner workings of a battery-powered type bar machine. And of course, you're using the Chapman typewriter set bits.
Yes. Because even though these are fairly large screws on the back, there's kind of the classic typewriter screw where you need a good fitting bit. Otherwise, they'll end up stripping out the slot.
Right.
So it only has 2 screws on the bottom here that hold the back panel on. Now, you don't have to take these screws off to change the battery. It's got, obviously, on the back side here, you got this power pack.
Power pack, yes.
And so this was oh, there we go. There's the power pack. They were in this plastic wrapped cylinder.
Yep.
And they are NiCads.
They're kind of D-cell diameter-wise, but they're shorter.
Right, and they call that in battery terminology half D.
Half D, okay.
And that's exactly what these really
so
are.
4 half Ds.
4 half Ds, they would stack them together. And so each one of these is 1.2 volts, so you get a total of 4.8 volts by rating. And then that would slide into this battery pack. And you can see now I've replaced those. Those are the old batteries, and they were worn out.
Yeah, after, what, 50 years or whatever
50 years,
it is?
they just didn't work anymore. I don't know why, but there you go.
Ooh.
Now, what you've heard fall is actually a spacer I've had to create. And we'll dig
And the
that out.
spacer is made from...
The spacer I had to make because what it turns out to, I'll explain that on the D cells here, even though they look like they're the exact same size, the button on top is a little different size, or not exactly. So this actually ended up, these 4 cells ended up being just a little bit shorter than these here. And I had to put a spacer here, which I did by using 3 pennies soldered together to give myself a conductive spacer.
Okay.
So the panel folds down.
So...
All right, so here's my penny spacers.
Yeah, and that just goes on the clip on the end.
Yeah, but putting it on the negative side against the flat side, and it just goes into the clip and makes up the distance.
Oh, very cool.
So it makes a nice contact. And it's tight in there, so unless you're trying to take the batteries out, they shouldn't slip. So now we've opened up the machine, and you can see what we have here. And kind of in this part here, you can see this is the standard mechanical part of the typewriter right here. It's the whole bottom mechanical part. And then here is the actually made by Black & Decker, direct current motor.
And you had this motor rebuilt, right?
Yes, I did, because the motor was kind of, when I finally got it to sort of work, it was struggling. And so I went to a local electric shop that works on motors, and they would handle this. And so they opened up the motor. It's a standard brush motor. The brushes were fine. And they said, yeah, it was just kind of dirty, gunked up and all that stuff. It does have a bronze bushing on the shaft end over here, and on this end it has a plastic bushing. And they said, well, that had cracked, and they were a little concerned, and they didn't want to fix it because it would have cost more. But they said if it runs well within it, it should be fine. Right. And but it does have enough meat in the material there. If we needed to put in a bronze bushing, that it would work. And it seems to be working fine now. It runs perfectly well. And then over in this area here is the single belt. So it comes off of the drive shaft here. One belt, it's a tooth belt that goes up into this area here where there's a pulley. And it runs rather loose. It's meant to run loose, not tight at all.
Oh, good.
And so that there's not a lot of stress on the motor as far as tension. And then, so that's the motor. So then the electrical part itself, it even comes with a wiring diagram right in this area here. You can see how it was here. And then AC power comes in from this connection right here.
Okay.
And then these orange wires go to that neon bulb.
Okay.
And then the bottom of that, the AC comes through here. And originally it would go up through this switch here. This is a voltage switch, so it could run either 220 or 110. And this here, I'll put this right here, was the original power supply. Now that was inside a cardboard container and then filled with all of that resin stuff they put in around it. So I cleaned all that out in the hopes of fixing the power supply, which I kind of did. because this resistor here, which was
Yeah.
there, really wasn't working anymore.
Right.
It had kind of worn out. And so it's a very simple circuit. It's a transformer, and then it would have two taps.
Right.
And then one tap would go straight to the motor, and the other tap would come to the battery to charge it up. But they both went through one diode
Rectifier.
for your rectifier, and then it went through this resistor. This is a 3 ohm resistor, and then this resistor right here was where the other tap would come. This is a 7.5 ohm resistor to drop the voltage. I never was able to actually ascertain what the original voltage coming off of the transformer is, but what would happen, even when I replaced it, and I had brought and had used a resistor, a modern one. Now this is a 10 watt, and this is only a 5 watt. That's the difference in size. I got it to work with that, but it really didn't put out enough voltage so that when I was actually running the motor, the voltage was dropping down to around 4 volts.
okay.
And it just wouldn't power the motor very well. It was just worn out, and maybe I needed to replace another resistor or something. It just wouldn't put that power out. So that was the original supply. So what I did, it would come through and it's a fuse here.
It's a fuse, good.
And it's
good.
an AC fuse.
Right.
And then it would come through, and then you would have your switch. So what I eliminated is that I ended up making and using a modern power supply that I happen to have. I have no idea what it went to, but this is the data plate. And it's
Avio switching power supply. So it's input or output is 9 volts at 1.5 amps.
that was the original plastic case from this particular power supply, and I opened that up so I could get to it and all that stuff. But 9 volts is obviously too high. This is a motor's rated at 5.4 volts is what the rating's at. And then obviously if you're doing the battery, you're only getting 4.8 by rating and all that stuff. So one thing led to another, and so I ended up using this power supply, but it didn't quite fit in its plastic case.
Oh, I see.
Because you got a mounting screw here, you got a place here, you got to fit it all in between. You got this strap, that's the original
bracket,
strap that held down the original power supply. It all had to fit in there, and you had to make sure it wasn't too tall so that it wouldn't interfere with anything in there.
Yeah.
What we ended up doing, Joe gave me a lot of advice in working on this, and we talked about it, and we actually did calculations trying to figure out the voltages and what we needed to do, and trying to the electronic parts of it. So we ended up taking the original power supply, which when you measured it, it was actually putting out 9.7 volts.
Right.
And so then I took some of these resistors at different resistance ratings, and ended up with a 2.7 and a 3.3 together, 6 ohm resistance, and put that on the side here. And so what that did is that once you come out of here, so your AC goes in there, and then here's your DC coming out, or the green wire is actually AC, and the DC is coming here, is that at idle with the motor turned on, no batteries, it was about 7 volts. Now that's higher than your rated volts, but what would happen is that when you started typing and putting a load on the motor, then that voltage would drop down to about 5 point something.
So at the rapid typing rate, like doing your auto repeat,
the auto space bars, things like that,
it would go down about 5 point.
5 point and all that stuff. So, and then the circuit, after it comes out of there, it runs one wire, goes straight to the on-off switch, and then it runs another wire that runs to the positive side of the battery pack, and then the negative wire runs around to the negative side of the battery pack and then runs from there to the motor. So it's designed so that the power supply, when you're running on AC, not only runs the motor, it also charges the battery.
Charges the battery at the same time.
And then from the positive side of the battery pack, there's a wire that goes up to a switch. So you have 2 wires that are feeding the switch.
I see.
And so that's how it works. That's where a lot of the time took, was trying to figure out exactly how much resistance to drop the voltage on the power supply.
Based on how much current it's drawing under load and all that, And
so that's why we ended up using a lot of, I used my voltmeter to do a lot of measurements and stuff like that. Now, what's interesting to me is that now I've put the battery pack in here with the new batteries, had to make my little spacer to make it all fit, is that even before these were charged up, when I've got them brand new, I was getting 5.2 volts.
Nice.
Not 4.8, but 5.2. I thought, well, that's interesting. So that's electronics. And then what I thought was interesting is that with the battery supply pack in here and the power supply feeding to the motor, I'm getting about 5.2 volts. So electrically, and maybe somebody that has a whole lot more electronic knowledge than I do, this is acting like a large capacitor. And it's also acting kind of like a semi-rectifier too, because it's kind of smoothing the voltage out.
Right.
And so that runs there. So when you measure all of that, so now even with load, when you run this and you have this on AC power, which we'll do in a sec, is when you're running this with load, you're still running about 5.2 volts.
Oh, wow. So it's pretty consistent, pretty stable.
Consistent. It stabilized the voltage, which I thought was really, really pretty interesting.
Yeah, it is.
So I thought, and trying to figure out how much voltage dropped from the 9 to all that stuff so that we're not overpowering the motor, as far as...
And the power supply is not being overloaded.
Not being overloaded. And I ended up using the 10-watt resistors for my drop there just because it was convenient, because I was trying to make the size here, and I stacked them here to make a nice little package.
Right.
I cut out some cardboard here, but I was really tight on clearances to fix it, so I had to not use all cardboard, and I used the electrical tape to kind of make this nice little package.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Very cool, actually.
And wired in. I eliminated the 220 because we're not going to use that, and this power supply didn't have a way to accept it.
Right.
The transformer inside this, you can just see that this is almost the size of that power supply. So the transformer here is much, much smaller, doing the same work, more modern electronics.
Right.
And then did a lot of soldering. I had to solder some wires onto the printed circuit board for the power supply.
You did a really good job, I think. I really did. That's amazing. And what's this adjustment here?
That is your
impression control.
That's your touch adjustment.
Touch adjustment.
And that's typical of these the Smith Corona electrics. You have a touch adjustment. Here's your little needle that tells you 1 through 4.
Right.
And then again, like it doesn't have an impression control. So you basically you get the impression that you're going to get.
Right.
And then we found when we were playing with this earlier, when we actually ran it on 9 volts, which it would type great, but boy, would it make an impact.
It would slam those type bars at 9 volts without any current limiting resistor.
Yeah, it would just go.
It would very dark impression, too dark.
But too dark. And, and the motor would handle it, but you could tell that it was running faster than it really wanted to.
Yeah.
And so.
Now, you were telling me when you were running it on the old power supply, it would run, but it would, what was it doing? It was making a...
Well, in the interim of all this would do it. But then I also I thought, well, this is only supposed to be 5.4 volts.
Yeah.
So I thought maybe I'll just use a 6-volt power supply.
Oh, yeah,
so
that's right. You had a 6-volt supply.
I had a 6-volt. And it was really interesting. Now, I didn't have the batteries in there, but with the 6-volt power supply, it was running it. But the problem was that as you typed, it would go...
so it wasn't providing enough current.
It wasn't providing enough current.
It would kind of bog down.
It would bog down and all that stuff. So and I typed a number of pages. I typed up a story just to see how it would work, and it typed fine. But my wife comes into the room. She says, "Is it always going to make that type of noise?" Because it was just this up and down sound. It almost sounded, and it reminded me of, at a much lower volume, of a police siren of the old-fashioned type, going, "Whoa!" Going down the road and stuff like that.
Okay.
And so I thought that was kind of interesting.
Well, that's cool. Well, let's put this back together, I guess, and just play with it, right? Let's do some typing.
Let's see how it works.
Okay.
What I thought we could show as we're typing for B-roll, so we show it plugged in.
Right.
So there it is plugged in. So now we're going to type.
Okay.
And then we'll rotate it and unplug it and type.
Oh, yes.
So we got that. So...
Unplugged. And there's the cord, unplugged. Amazing. It's a miracle. It works even with the cord unplugged. That was quite a demonstration, especially unplugging the power cord and having it still work.
Yeah, unplug the power cord and it still works. And it's just amazing, like we had discussed at one point, that even with the new power supply, but no batteries, the motor would vary in speed as under load. You put the battery in there and it's basically running off of AC power converted to DC power and the battery at the same time, it acts like a regulator for that.
Yeah, it just smooths out that load.
That load, and it seems to type the same consistency. And you're running in the same thing. So when I measured the voltage with all of that, you're running at about 5.2 volts or something like that, which is more than enough to get a good impression.
Right.
If you get down to when I did before, you get down around 4 volts, then it wouldn't even bring the type bars up. It just wasn't running fast enough.
Wow. Yeah. It's a handsome typewriter. It definitely has the kind of 1960s styling, but I really like this bright red kind of grooved trim plate on the front here, bezel, and then it has this sort of grayish color and the cream colored keyboard and keys and trim. But I understand you have another color scheme you're thinking about repainting this,
I do
right?
have a color. So leading into that, what surprises me, not having owned one of these machines with the chiclet type of keys that some people may call these, I've always wondered, am I going to like that or not?
Right.
And what is interesting is that having typed on this a bit now, it actually is very comfortable to type.
Right.
Obviously, because of being electric, you don't have to worry about pushing your A down far enough with your weak fingers and stuff like that. But it's very comfortable to type on, and I've actually kind of grown to like this separated keys with the cover and stuff like that. It's a very nice feel. Like you said, as far as going to the different color scheme, what we found, because we got these wonderful reds, and then obviously the logo, you got a black, and then there's some bright white, and then there's kind of a cream colored white and stuff like that. And we thought, well, what would make a really good, this is a Poweriter. You want to have this dynamic coloring machine. So what we came up with, and that's the next step with this machine, is that this gray color, and here we're going to repaint that in a matte black color.
Yes.
So it's going to be kind of a more macho type of color, I guess you could almost call it. And then to give it that power, racing stripe look, we're going to bring a couple of stripes in this area and across in this area like that, and we're going to do it. And this happens to be, this book is about the right colors. You can kind of imagine
in red,
with these red matte colored racing stripes. So it's going to go with this matte color, not a high gloss black like a 1930s machine, but it's going to be this matte racing stripe. And then that'll carry over, as you see on the right here, that there's some gray spots right down in here. So that racing stripe will come down and then corner here, and then it'll stop across the top of the
right on this top ledge here. It'll kind of stop right there.
Yeah, it'll kind of stop right in that area, and then that'll be black. So it kind of give it a kind of a dynamic look.
And these are all metal pieces that you're going to be repainting. So
so it's going to be very easy to repaint. Actually, the most difficult part of repainting that is getting the ribbon cover off.
Oh yeah. These 6 series ribbon covers are not easy to get off.
These it's all
it's
kind
an
of
articulated linkage, and you got to hold your mouth just right.
Right, and then you have to pull off the back cover bottom. So actually taking the covers off is going to be more difficult, and then putting them back on and not scratching the paint.
Not scratching. That's the problem.
But it's not. There's a little bit of a wrinkle finish. I would actually call this more of an orange peel type of finish.
Yeah.
That if you were doing an automobile, you would color sand that out to get a nice high gloss finish. They didn't on these industrial production item.
Right.
But I'll sand it off, and it'll be a nice matte black. So you can kind of envision, it'll be about the same shade as the ribbon.
Yes, right.
It'll be this
that dark gray, dark blackish, flat
black type of color.
Yeah.
And then I found out you can get a matte clear coat. So then once it's on there and you got the stripe, then I'll put a clear coat on it just as a kind of a protection, but it'll still be a matte finish. It won't change it to a gloss finish. I think that'll make it look really neat.
Well, this is a neat typewriter. I mean, it has all the basics of the 6 series, right? You have your carriage return lever, but it has the little padding, the little plastic, actually rubbery kind of pads on the tip of the carriage return lever. It has your standard 3 line spacing, 1, 2, and 3, and your standard carriage release levers that are prone to break if you're not careful with them, obviously.
Careful, yep.
And it has the quick disconnect platen feature that all the 6 series
popped
have.
it out. It actually comes out a little bit easier than the 5 series that I have. Just a little bit.
And, of course, the nice big finger on the right side of the paper bale and the rubber paper bale rollers. And your erasing table and your rabbit ear style paper support that are spring loaded, which is really nice. And it has your line spacing variable clutch button on the left platen knob.
Yep.
And then on the keyboard, you have the standard 6 series, the big tabulator bar up on top, the set and clear. So key set tabulator, margin release, and backspace are both manual, right?
Right.
And then your shift is power shifted.
It is power shift because it's a segment shift.
Segment shifted keyboard or typewriter. And then you have your standard American style keyboard with a number 1, of course, and the equal sign. So.
But what's nice for the writers in us is that because it is an electric machine, not a manual machine, they put the apostrophe and the quotes to the right of the semicolon and colon.
Yeah, so you have a unshifted apostrophe, which if you're writing any kind of dialogue where you have people talking in contractions,
yes,
a standard manual typewriter, you're always shifting the 8,
shifting the 8, and then shifting the 2.
Shifting the 2. But having that lowercase apostrophe just makes the writing so much better. I mean, that right there is one reason to go with a Type R Electric.
Oh, yeah.
Because even as far back as the 1950s, the 5 Series Smith Coronas had that lowercase apostrophe feature, which is really great for writers.
Yeah. And another nice feature that the Smith Coronas have, too, they have the paper guide here for telling you when you get into the end of paper guide.
Yes.
And if you do it right, like for 8.5 by 11 paper, you set it at 11 when you feed it in, put it in there, and then when you to get that 1 inch, you end up looking here. The number 2 will show up after you feed it in there, and you set it up right at about the number 2, and then that leaves you 1 inch, and then you go type, and then down, and it shows that as a number 1. Then you're 1 inch from the bottom.
Fantastic.
And it works. You just have to remember to set it up.
Well, the only 6 series, I've had 2 6 series machines. I had my Galaxy 12, which is 12-inch carriage. Coronet Automatic 12 is 12-inch carriage. I really like this. What is this, 10-inch maybe?
10-inch or 9-inch?
9-inch, yeah. This narrower carriage. Let's use Aunt Pat's ruler. By the way, my 91-year-old aunt is in the hospital in Colorado Springs. Anyways, so you guys might want to think about her. But the platen itself is about 9 inches. It's a 9-inch platen. Fantastic. Yeah. So I like these narrower carriage 6 series machines.
Yeah, and the case that it comes in is about the same as the standards, the Smith Corona Electric
taller,
Portable.
Right.
It's just a bit taller.
Yeah.
And what's neat, now it is a heavy machine when you transport it, but you know what's nice about being a heavy machine? It doesn't move when you do something like that. It stays put. So it's like your Royal that you were talking about, that it stays put.
And these 6 series machines have these big rubber bars, and not just little feet, but an entire bar on each side. So plenty of gripping surface. Keeping them from moving around. Even on this carpeted, padded table, it doesn't move that easy. So very cool.
And when you think about it, when most of us are going to go out typing in the wild or something like that,
of course,
we're driving a car.
We're driving a car, right?
Yeah. Maybe you would be driving your scooter at some point, but you're going to be driving a car, so it doesn't matter that this machine weighs more, and it's a little bulkier than an ultra portable.
But you can still take it because you don't need a power cord.
You don't need a power cord.
The batteries are charged. Now, you haven't actually tested the battery life yet, right?
No, the batteries are just put in there, and they actually haven't even been, like I said, fully charged because I haven't left it on. I don't know electronically, how long it takes to charge it up.
Right.
And hopefully it won't overcharge. Right. I don't think it will.
Now, the difference between this and a daisy wheel typewriter, obviously, is on these Type R Electrics, the motor always turns as long as the thing's turned on.
Right.
So it's going to consume battery power just being turned on.
Right.
But you don't have to leave it turned on. If you get to a point where you're kind of pausing and trying to think about what you want to write, you just turn the switch off.
Exactly.
And then you go back, turn it on, and continue typing if you want.
Then to continue typing in the wild, so let's say we're out there, we're doing one of our picnics or something like that, and we're going to be out there for 3 or 4 hours. I would imagine that this would probably run down if it ran for 4 hours continuously.
Yeah.
I can't imagine it's going to go any longer than a laptop computer would, which is like a 2-hour battery often. Maybe they're better now.
If you compare this to a laptop computer, they really haven't gotten any more advanced.
As far as battery life.
It's probably about the same as this, right?
Right. But then I did look, and one of the options was that you can buy these nice battery pack converter things that you
Oh.
charge up in themselves, and they're for emergency use, but they have an AC outlet coming through it.
Oh, yes.
So you bring that along, you have your portable battery
That's right.
pack, if you think you're going to be out there that
Right.
long. Or like we've discovered with my Tacoma, which has a built-in generator in the back on the near the tailgate.
Right, you can run it from your truck.
We can run it from the truck, and so then consequently too, we can do our own tailgate party
Tailgate parties.
on the back of
On the back.
set our chairs up, set the typewriters on the tailgate, and we can plug
Well,
it in. And with that, I can
yes.
even have you bring your own type bar electric that's not
Oh, that's
battery
right.
operated.
I'll be bringing one of my Typewriter electrics. That sounds so. Put that on the calendar when it gets warmer.
Exactly.
We're going to be up in the Sandia Mountains maybe later this year, we hope. Cross your fingers. Well, Kevin, I'm really glad you brought this by. Thanks for coming by. It's been a while since you've been on the channel, and I look forward to seeing the paint job when you finally get it finished.
Yeah, that'll be fun.
That'll be fun. Well, thank you a lot for coming by and showing us this great beauty. These are not this common. Not very common, I think, you know?
No, they aren't that common. Even Smith Corona just didn't make that many of them, probably because the battery life just wasn't long enough for what people wanted,
Right.
or they didn't want to spend the money on.
Which
I'm sure
reminds
these were
me,
probably more expensive.
If battery life does become an issue, there is the possibility of upgrading to lithium-ion batteries.
Yeah, we could.
And that's a whole nother project.
That's a whole nother project.
But in the meanwhile, how about you guys? Have you ever considered a battery-powered Typewriter electric? Well, here it is. Drop a note down below. I'd love to hear your comments about this. Thank you again, Kevin, for coming by. And until next time, you guys stay well, stay creative, and have yourselves a great day. Bye-bye for now. Okay, let's start writing.